The year was 1865, and the plains stretched wide under a bruised purple sky. Daniel McGraw rode hard across the last ridge, his mare lathered with sweat, hooves pounding dust into the dying light. He had been gone since dawn, driving strays back from the low creek bed, thinking only of supper and the quiet laughter of his wife. The land was harsh, but her presence made it softer. Now, as the sun sank, he pictured the lamp in their cabin window, the smell of bread cooling on the sill. He had no notion that the world he left in the morning would be gone before nightfall. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin curl against the gloaming. Yet, as he neared, his stomach tightened. The corral gate hung open, one hinge twisted loose. His hound was nowhere in sight. The front door, normally barred against the wind, gaped wide. Daniel pulled his horse to a halt, listening. Silence. Not the good kind, the bad kind, the kind that pressed against the ears. He slid from the saddle, revolver in hand, boots crunching on gravel. Inside, the cabin was wrecked. A chair lay split across the floor. Crockery shattered. Underfoot, the smell of kerosene mingled with smoke. His eyes caught on something that froze him where he stood. Eliza's scarf, torn in two, snagged on a nail by the hearth. His chest tightened until breath seemed impossible. He stepped further, scanning for her, calling her name in a voice ragged with fear. Nothing. Only the wind prying through the broken shutters. Then he saw the picture frame lying cracked in the dirt, their wedding photograph smudged and bent. He picked it up with trembling hands, thumb brushing the glass. The fury came swift and hot, drowning grief for the moment. He kicked through the wreckage, forcing himself to think like a hunter. Near the back door, boot prints gouged deep into the earth. Outside, hoof marks scarred the soil, leading north toward the river. The bastards had taken her. His Eliza, the one soul who kept him tethered to this brutal land. Daniel mounted again, every muscle taut with rage. He pushed his mare toward town, spurs biting, heart thudding with each stride. The night wind cut sharp across his face, carrying the distant cry of coyotes. He barely heard it, his mind replaying every laugh, every promise, every whisper Eliza had ever given him. He had sworn before God and man to keep her safe. Now she was gone, and only his will could bring her back. By the time he thundered into the trading post, lanterns burned low. Men clustered at the bar, their talk falling silent when Daniel shoved through the door. He was a large man, shoulders broad from years of ranch work, eyes pale, with a fury that turned the air cold. He slammed his hand on the counter, demanding to know who had ridden through, who had seen anything. The barkeep stammered, eyes shifting to the corner where a pair of drifters sat. One snorted, half smiling, as if enjoying the sight of a desperate man. "They come through," the drifter drawled, rolling a cigarette between dirty fingers. "Took a woman. Pretty thing. Didn't ask her opinion." His grin was jagged, meant to taunt. Daniel's revolver was in his hand before the man had time to blink. The hammer clicked back, the sound slicing through the smoke-thick room. "Say it again," Daniel growled, voice low and dangerous. The other drifter raised his hands quickly, muttering that they wanted no trouble. Tension stretched thin as wire. After a long beat, Daniel lowered the weapon, though his eyes stayed fixed like iron on the grinning man until the smile faded to ash. A murmur spread through the crowd, Colt Blackwood's gang. They had been raiding ranches for weeks, taking cattle, coin, and sometimes worse. Men spoke of them like a sickness sweeping the land. Blackwood was no ordinary outlaw. He was a soldier turned predator, hardened by war, feared for his cruelty. If Eliza had fallen into his hands, her life hung by a thread. Daniel's jaw tightened. He could almost hear her voice in memory. "Asterisk, if you ever lose me, promise you'll find me. Promise you'll never stop fighting." Asterisk, he had given that promise once. Tonight it became a vow. He stormed out of the post, fury burning through his veins. The townsfolk watched him go, whispers following in his wake. Some pitied him, others thought him a fool, but none doubted he would ride into hell itself. He made for his cabin, gathered what he could: rope, water, dried meat, and his father's old Colt revolver. The weapon felt heavy with history, as though every bullet carried not just lead but legacy. The moon climbed high, silvering the plains. Daniel saddled up once more, pausing only to tie Eliza's torn scarf around his wrist. It was a token, a reminder of what he fought for, and what he could not afford to lose. His mare pawed the earth, eager to run. He looked back once at the dark shape of their home, the wreckage still visible through the open door. Then he turned away. There was nothing left there now, nothing but shadows and memories. The land stretched ahead, cruel and endless. Coyotes howled on the ridges, the sound chasing him into the night. Yet beneath the weight of fear, beneath the ache of grief, a fire burned hotter than either. They had taken her, but they would learn that some bonds could not be broken, not by chains, not by distance, not by death. For love had a will of its own, and Daniel McGraw would ride until the world itself split beneath his horse's hooves, if that was the cost. So began his hunt, not for justice, not for vengeance, but for the beating heart that had been torn from his side. Every hoofbeat was a promise, every breath a declaration. They had taken her from him, but nothing on God's earth could kill his love. And as the night swallowed him, only the stars bore witness to the beginning of a reckoning. The trading post lay behind him like a bitter taste in his mouth, but the words he had heard there sharpened Daniel's resolve. Colt Blackwood. The name echoed in his head like the crack of a whip. Men said the outlaw was a devil wearing human skin, a soldier who had traded honor for savagery when the war ended. Daniel did not fear him. He feared only the thought of Eliza fading away, her spirit broken in some dark canyon while he lingered behind. That fear drove him harder than spurs, mile after mile into the wilderness. By dawn, the land was awake with the sounds of wings and the scurry of small creatures. Daniel dismounted near a creek, studying the mud for signs. Hoofprints pressed deep, more than one rider, their horses burdened. His pulse quickened. He followed the trail, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The wilderness was merciless. By midday, smoke rose on the horizon. A trading post, half broken, sagged against the plain. He approached with caution, revolver loose in his grip. The place reeked of rotgut whiskey and gunpowder. Men lounged in the shadows, rifles leaning against the wall, eyes cold as knives. Daniel tied his horse behind a rise and stepped forward, boots sinking into the mud. Conversation stilled. A dozen eyes cut toward him. He kept walking, jaw set, each stride steady. Inside, the air was heavy with tobacco and tension. A man sat behind the counter, greasy hair slicked back, a scar splitting his cheek. Daniel asked straight, had they seen Blackwood's men? The scarred man laughed, the sound sharp and mean. Maybe I have, maybe I ain't. Depends who's a-skinned. The room tensed as hands drifted toward holsters. Daniel's voice dropped low, steady as a drawn bow. I'm a skin. And if you know, you'll speak now. His revolver gleamed in the lamplight, raised just enough to remind them of his intent. The first shot came from the corner. Daniel dropped to one knee, firing back before the sound had even died. Wood splintered, glass shattered. The room erupted into chaos. Men scrambled, pistols barking, smoke filling the cramped space. Daniel moved like a man possessed, each shot deliberate, each step forward. One outlaw collapsed across a table, blood darkening the wood. Another staggered backward, clutching his chest. When the smoke cleared, two men lay dead, another groaned in pain, and the rest had fled like jackals. Daniel strode to the wounded man, boot pressing on his chest. Where is she? The outlaw spat blood, eyes wild with pain. They took her north. Blackwood's Canyon camp, near the river bend. Daniel pressed harder, enough to draw a cry. How many? The man wheezed. Too many for you, rancher. You'll die before you take a step closer. Daniel pulled back, holstering his gun. Then I'll die trying. He left the man gasping, the words ringing in his ears. The wilderness stretched wide and cruel as Daniel rode north. Hunger gnawed at him. Nights fell cold, stars wheeling overhead like silent judges. He fought sleep, his body aching, his mind fixed on Eliza. Once, as he drifted near unconsciousness, he thought he heard her voice, calling his name through the wind. It kept him alive, one step more, 1 mile further. His love became both wound and medicine, hurting him, healing him, urging him on. 3 days out, he was ambushed. Arrows hissed past his head, one slicing the brim of his hat. He dived behind a boulder, revolver drawn. Shapes moved in the grass, Cheyenne hunters, bows taut. Daniel shouted that he meant no harm, but his words carried little weight. They closed in, fierce and silent. He raised his weapon, prepared to fight if he must. Then one stepped forward, a man with braids falling across his shoulders, eyes sharp as hawks. He held up something in his hand. Eliza's scarf, the other half of it, stained but recognizable. Daniel froze. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. The hunter studied him, then spoke in halting English. "White thieves. They kill. They take." Woman was with them. A heavy silence stretched. Daniel lowered his revolver, chest tightening. "She's mine. My wife. I'm going after her." The hunter looked long into his face, perhaps weighing truth against desperation. At last he nodded. "We go. We hunt together." The days that followed were a trial of fire. The Cheyenne moved swift and sure through the land, reading signs Daniel barely understood. They tracked broken twigs, bent grass, faint ash from dying fires. Daniel kept pace, though his body screamed. Each night they built small fires, their silence heavy, but not unfriendly. Daniel found himself speaking into the dark, telling of Eliza, of her kindness, her laughter. The hunter listened without expression, though once Daniel thought he saw the faintest flicker of sympathy in his eyes. The river crossing came at dusk. The waters roared, swollen with spring melt. Daniel's mare balked at the edge, nostrils flaring. He pressed her forward, heart hammering. Halfway across, the current seized them. Daniel was thrown, dragged under, the world spinning in cold fury. His lungs burned. Darkness swelled. Then a hand seized him, hauling him up, dragging him to shore. The Cheyenne stood above him, chest heaving, water streaming down his braids. "Love makes strong," he said quietly, "but love makes blind too." Daniel coughed, gasping, unable to answer. Yet inside he knew the man spoke truth. That night, as they camped beneath a crescent moon, a cougar screamed in the distance. Hours later, it struck, a blur of claws and teeth. Daniel fought with knife in bare hands, the beast's weight crushing him. Pain lanced through his shoulder as claws tore flesh. He drove the blade home again and again until the animal went limp. Blood soaked his shirt, hot and heavy. He staggered back, vision dimming, but he did not fall. The Cheyenne bound his wounds in silence, nodding once in quiet respect. Daniel lay staring at the stars, every breath agony, but his heart unbroken. The thought of Eliza's face kept him tethered to life. When dawn came, the hunter pointed toward the horizon. Smoke curled faint against the sky, thin as a whisper. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Blackwood's camp was near. His body was battered, his strength failing, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. He touched the scarf on his wrist, fingers trembling. "Hold on, Eliza," he murmured, voice rough but steady. "I'm coming." The canyon lay shrouded in dusk, its walls painted crimson by the dying sun. Smoke twisted upward from a cluster of fires below, each flame marking the outlaw camp like a wound upon the earth. Daniel crouched on the ridge, breath shallow, shoulder throbbing beneath its bandages. The Cheyenne hunter knelt beside him, gaze fixed on the wagons, circled like a corral of misery. From this distance, Daniel could make out figures, men slouched with whiskey bottles, others sharpening knives, their laughter rolling cruel through the canyon. And there, half hidden by shadow, he saw her. Eliza. Chains bound her to the wagon's wheel, her head bowed, hair matted, but even broken she was unmistakable. His heart clenched. She was alive. The hunter touched his arm, speaking low. "Many guns. Too many." Daniel shook his head, jaw set. "I didn't come this far to count them. I came to take her back." His voice was gravel, every word weighed with love and rage. They waited until night deepened. The camp grew louder, men brawling, singing off-key. Torches sputtered. Daniel slipped into the shadows, moving with the patience of a wolf. Each step was pain, but pain sharpened him. He thought of Eliza's voice, the way she had once whispered courage into him when doubts gnawed his spirit. That memory guided his hand now as he drew his revolver and pressed on. Closer. The stench of sweat and liquor stung his nostrils. He crept past a dozing guard, the man's rifle slack in his grip. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the wagon. Eliza lifted her head, as though some instinct told her he was near. For a fleeting moment, their gazes met. Her lips parted in silent disbelief. His chest swelled with fierce resolve. He pressed a finger to his lips, urging her to hold steady. He reached her side, dropping to his knees. The chains rattled faintly as he pulled at the lock, knife flashing in the firelight. "Eliza," he whispered, voice breaking. "I've come." Tears brimmed in her eyes, though her voice was no more than a breath. "I knew you would." The words barely left her mouth before a shout split the night. "Intruder!" Rifles cracked, torches flared. Daniel swung around, revolver barking. The first outlaw dropped, a second staggered back, screaming. Chaos erupted. Eliza cried out as bullets snapped through the air. Daniel threw himself in front of her, firing fast, each shot a thunderclap of fury. The camp roared awake like a hive struck by fire. The Cheyenne burst from the darkness, loosing arrows swift and deadly. Men fell cursing. Horses screamed, breaking their tethers, scattering through the canyon. Daniel fired until his revolver clicked empty, then swung his knife, slashing through the chain at Eliza's wrist. She stumbled free, clutching his arm, her eyes wide with fear but burning with love. "We have to move." But a voice rose above the din, cold and commanding. Colt Blackwood strode from his tent, broad-shouldered, scar-faced, revolvers gleaming in each hand. The camp seemed to draw breath around him. His men pulled back, giving him space. Blackwood's smile was a wolf's grin. "Well, well," the rancher with more heart than sense. His voice carried smooth and venomous. "You've killed my boys, stolen my woman. You think you'll leave here alive?" Daniel stepped forward, shielding Eliza behind him. His knife dripped with blood, his revolver empty, but his stance unbroken. "She was never yours, and I'll leave here with her, or I'll bury you where you stand." Blackwood chuckled, spinning his revolvers with practiced ease. "Then let's see which of us the frontier favors." The air crackled. Time slowed. Daniel reached for the spare cylinder in his belt, loading with hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. Blackwood fired first. Dust exploded at Daniel's feet. Daniel rolled aside, answering with a shot that grazed Blackwood's arm. The outlaw laughed, eyes gleaming with delight at the fight. They circled each other, gunfire echoing against the canyon walls. Each shot was a heartbeat, each miss a breath stolen. Blackwood's grin faltered when Daniel's bullet tore through his thigh, but still he advanced, relentless. Daniel's shoulder burned, blood soaking his shirt, yet he pressed forward. Every ounce of pain was nothing compared to the thought of losing Eliza again. The final moment came sudden and brutal. Blackwood lunged, revolver raised for the kill. Daniel dropped low, firing point-blank. The outlaw staggered, shock flashing in his eyes as the shot tore through his chest. He fell hard, dust rising around him. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the camp broke. Outlaws fled, some screaming Blackwood's name, others vanishing into the dark. The Cheyenne loosed one last arrow, felling a straggler. Daniel stood trembling, revolver smoking in his hand, breath ragged. Blackwood lay still, the grin gone forever from his lips. Eliza rushed to Daniel, throwing her arms around him. He clutched her as though afraid she might vanish, burying his face in her hair. She whispered through tears, "You found me. I knew you would." His voice cracked. "I nearly lost myself along the way. But nothing, not distance, not bullets, not death, could kill what I carry for you." The Cheyenne approached, bow lowered, eyes solemn. "Fight is done. You go now." Daniel nodded, gratitude unspoken but heavy in his gaze. The hunter slipped back into the night, as silent as he had come, leaving Daniel and Eliza alone in the wreckage of the camp. The journey home was slow and brutal. Daniel's wounds reopened with each mile, hunger gnawed, and the nights bit cold. Yet with Eliza beside him, each step became lighter. She supported him when his strength faltered, whispered hope when shadows closed in. They shared what little food remained, hands clasped as though the grip itself could ward off despair. On the seventh day, the outline of their cabin appeared against the horizon, battered but standing. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. Eliza pressed her head against his shoulder, her eyes wet but shining. "We're home," she said softly. They crossed the threshold together. The wreckage remained, but it no longer felt like ruin. It felt like proof of what they had endured, of what love had conquered. Daniel sank into the chair, exhausted, Eliza's hand still in his. The silence now was not empty but full of survival, of promise, of unyielding devotion. Outside, the wind swept across the plains, carrying the memory of gunfire and blood into the endless horizon. Inside, Daniel closed his eyes, whispering the vow that had carried him through the fire. "They took you from me, but they'll never take what binds us. Nothing ever will." And so the frontier, cruel and wild, bore witness to a truth stronger than steel. Love, unyielding, unbreakable, endured beyond bullets, beyond fire, beyond death itself.